Let's talk about collaborating with other authors real quick. Anytime that you enter into a partnership with somebody else in a business sense, you are taking on a partner. When you're doing a collaboration, the people that you're collaborating with become your partners in that project. Having had bad experiences with partnerships in the past and struggled with some of the issues that have arisen, when you're dealing with partnerships, especially when things go wrong, it can be perilous. You have financial and business aspects that are tied together. Disclaimer aside, there's a few different types of collaborative partnerships that I have considered with other authors. Basically, three main categories are the ones that I mostly look at. The way that those main forms of potentially compensated collaborations would work together would be a compilation of books, mutual editing and technical support, technical consultation with others, interviews, podcasts, and videos. And there's a few other things that might crop up, but those three kind of strike me as the places where you have financial entanglements with other people. And what I mean by financial entanglements is if we have an author we are working with who routinely sells 100,000 books a year, we put that author as an anchor in a compilation. They write 10,000 words, and then 7 other authors come together with you. You all go in to write a compilation of 10,000 words. So everybody's about the same size as part of the work. The question that begins to get asked is, whose work is worth more? If you have a collection of 8 relatively unknown authors and 1 author with a huge following, is that author with the huge following the anchor for the entire work? What happens if somebody else's work is better? How do you compensate? People who are gaining exposure through inclusion of that large anchor author, is their compensation the exposure, or do they need to be paid for the work too? How do we divide out proceeds from the book? If I'm doing all of the work for assembling the book, what is my share? Is it 50% of proceeds? Is it 10% of proceeds? Because if we have 9 authors total, and I'm doing an additional share of the work to put the book together, how do we compensate for that? Just like any partnership, what will end up happening is if we don't have that clearly specified, suddenly people can start getting upset with shares, allocations, etc. If you want to meet the devil in somebody, put money on the table. When you have compilation and you're sharing work, if your book does not sell, you're not going to have much of a problem. But if you have that high-end author who is included in the process, and the book sells gangbusters because they are included in your compilation, do those other authors want to get compensated and change the deal after the fact? Now we start looking at lawsuits because we have people who may or may not have a claim for compensation. We have to be very careful how we string together our contract. Do the additional authors start getting compensated at a certain overage of books? Is that something we even consider beforehand? The larger the money at stake, the higher the risk of problems and issues. Most partnerships fall apart over money and work balance issues. Every compilation that you assemble is a partnership. Understanding the risk of partnerships, is that something that I really want to take on? Do I want to bring in that potential hassle? I don't know. There may be a point in the future where I have a stronger position in that negotiation. When you are the person who's moving 100,000 books and you are doing the charity invitation for somebody who's moving 100 books as a new author, you can offer that as a boost to up and coming. Is that act of charity on your part as the person producing 100,000 sales a year worthy of compensation to the person selling 100 books a year? The exposure for the person selling 100 books a year becomes more important than potential compensation. If they're riding along, the coattails are going to potentially introduce them to new audience. That dynamic changes if we are inviting a large author into our partnership and we are not that large author. So as far as the creation of compilation works, the ability to effectively parcel out the labor, contributions, and compensation is really important. By the same token, if you have 9 unknowns and you as the author who's assembling the compilation takes a 10th share, now you have to cut 9 checks. Even if your pull is 20% and everybody else is getting 10%, you have to have a period of time where you are regulating who gets what. Do you want to spend 30 cents on a stamp to send a 20-cent check? If you're splitting the book 10 ways and you don't make much money, those checks can be small. For example, Amazon doesn't pay out until you've got like $15 or $20 on the Amazon affiliate. Maybe that has to be specified in your contract. How do you account for the upfront costs of creating your compilation book? We just mentioned the contract for compensation versus time for your stories that people are contributing. That's going to require legal input, either some kind of online service, which I'm not aware exists, to create a specialty contract for a book-related partnership. Or we're going to have to pay a lawyer. If you're working with a lawyer and they have to spend 5 hours in your contract, $300 an hour, it's $1,500. $400 an hour, you're talking $2,000 that you're sinking into a contract before you've made a dime on your compilation book. How do you account for that? And then you've got that one person who says, I put my 10,000 words in. You got paid $200 this month for the book. I want my $20. We're still $1,800 in the hole from the contract you signed. How do you specify that? How do you reconcile that? And then you get sued by somebody who hasn't contributed much, who didn't do the work, put 10,000 words into a story that they had sitting on their file cabinet for the last 10 years. Compilation books seems like a potentially perilous route unless you are in a position of superior strength, position of power. When you can offer the compilation book as a boost to help others, I think that when we remove the compensation piece from the book, we start to see a much nicer return. It eliminates problems. Again, if you make the compilation and it's done as a charity thing and there's no compensation, we're just doing exposure for the new authors, suddenly that work starts to sell 10,000 copies a month. So we're making $2. It's $2,000 a month to a new author. That's a lot of money. Now all of a sudden you start having conversations about how do we compensate on that? Again, retroactively on the contract. But if we are already in a position where we're selling 100,000 books a year and our new compilation moves $20,000, do we really need to squat on that money? I think that's a personal decision. I think people can apply themselves to how they would make that work. Because for me, I don't find the creation of compilation works very appealing. They seem like a large allocation of time with a lot of risk, with a lot of management, with a lot of headaches that would distract from other work, other projects. The next piece that pops into my head as far as collaborating with other authors is something I have done before. I have mutually edited other people's work, and I have done technical consultation with other people's work. The editing is fairly straightforward. When it's two people exchanging edits on books, I've given fair exchange and name to name so that the author name and the individual name who's done the edits are the same. You get credit for editing when somebody searches you. That's one way of doing it. The technical consultation typically works out to somebody who's not particularly familiar with firearms, say. If they ask, hey, how does this thing work? That's not really something that I or most other people would probably be interested in compensation for. That's just a conversation about experience. And if they cite you, great. If not, who cares? The third major thing I've interacted with is the interviews, podcasts, and videos. I have participated in other people's videos, other people's podcasts. I am in the process of doing interviews for a series of books that I'm creating. Typically, the person who is being interviewed is the one who is being helped. I, as the person doing the interview, am applying my time and applying my effort. They are contributing an interview. They're contributing pictures, most likely. When we're putting those into that sphere of interaction between authors, we now have a shared video. We now have a shared property that we can both make our highlight reels from. Some of my best performing videos were taken from pieces of interviews that I've done with other people. I guess the final piece that I have experienced and brought up is similar to the interviews, podcasts, videos piece. It's the cross-promotion piece. When you're doing the technical creation of your website, one of the major things that's going to be an issue is how do you create the backlinks? The larger search engines use backlinks like a research paper is used at a university. So a research paper that is comprehensive, thought out, developed, etc., is naturally going to create a cloud of research around it. The theory of gravity is fairly comprehensive, but over time, as science develops, as instruments become more powerful, as we get more accurate measurements, perhaps those measurements change. Those results in the paper change. Over time, that theory of gravity thesis is developed and more papers are written on it, but they are all referencing back to the original primary theory. There may be just tweaking. When we're in a position where we are cross-promoting, especially when we're relatively small, if both sides have comparable sized audiences between a few hundred and 5,000 in a month visiting our homepage and passing through our social media and web presence, when we have a similar weight, promotion is helpful because we both earn backlinks from our friends and allied authors. I've mentioned it before about networking our publishing. Using cross-promotion is probably going to be the primary way I end up collaborating with other authors as a more technical person. Putting those backlinks into place is important. Making sure that the books connect is important. Talking to friends and people who are on the same path, and boosting each other up is important. I think I described that as network publishing. Networked publishing is basically, instead of having a central organization that's got stovepipes and they've got editors and they've got this and that, and you have to apply to become part of it, and they may or may not take you, the networked publishing is effectively a bunch of independent authors putting our work together and collaborating to introduce our audiences to each other, effectively using the social media presence more than a traditional publisher might. With a traditional publisher, I go out, I get a contract, I sign my contract for my royalty or compensation for submission of the book. It's a signing bonus to join the publisher. The more likely your book is to sell, the more likely you'll have a good signing bonus. The more books you are already selling, the more you are worth. Therefore, they would be more willing to cut you a larger check to join their stable of authors. When you are starting out, building your brand, doing the cross-promotion piece and networking with other people in a similar situation, you are going to cross-pollinate your audience. You and I get together and have a podcast and discuss how we're doing things. My audience watches, your audience watches. You have 1,000 people who watch. I have 1,000 people who watch because we're both relatively new. And maybe half of each decide to sign up for each other's podcast. Now we have leveraged up and we have bootstrapped ourselves to 1,500 followers and 1,500 followers instead of 1,000 and 1,000. We begin to potentially run into conflicts when we have one author cross-promoting another who has a vastly larger platform. Think about your local 10,000 book a month author. You meet at a coffee shop, you're writing books side by side, and they decide to give you a spot on their podcast. They've now cross-promoted you. What can you give them in return? It may be a senior assisting a junior on the path. It may be a mentorship type, but you can fast sour that kind of relationship if you are the junior and you are taking more from the partnership than you are offering. So that's something to be aware of, especially when you're trying to build an effective network, because if you begin to achieve a reputation as a taker and not a giver, not somebody who's assisting in building the partnership as a whole, that's not going to do too well for you because that reputation is going to stick. It's really difficult to get rid of a bad reputation. And that is something to consider, especially when we're collaborating with other authors. The first thing working on is the interviews. The second piece is the cross promotion, which isn't that huge of a collaboration. It's more of a quick link. Instead of spending hours or weeks building collaboration, a quick link and a cross promotion might take 15 minutes. If we both contribute 15 minutes, we have similar audiences, we're on par. Nobody's taking from anybody. We're making a trade. Where it starts getting complicated is when one person is vastly more powerful in the industry than the other. So that's when we start needing to be careful, as in all human relationships. So those are the thoughts on collaborating with other authors. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just cautious because of partnership issues that I've dealt with in the past. So when you have partnerships that have gone sour on you, you start to see where the landmines are before you get too far down the road, because you do not want to be on that road when it's mined. It's going to make a bad day. You really don't have to look too far in your life to find a friend, a family member, or a business associate who has had a partnership go sour. I am also not saying don't do collaborative works. What I am saying is be careful and go in with your eyes open, because the benefits and challenges, depending upon how you structure things, depending upon the safeguards that you put in place, may or may not effectively pay for the contributions you've made in the project. So those are the thoughts on the collaborating with other authors. I hope that helps somebody. Have a great day.